Like there's things that are on the fringe of my specialty that I can get into, I can learn relatively quickly and make progress and move forward, right? But this is like beyond that, where it's like you don't just jump into the deep end with this thing. You kind of like you need some guidance, and just looking at it, I mean, it's a minimum 8-month project, right? Minimum. Like there's no going around it, right? So the
I agree.
problem is massive. And I didn't even realize that it was that big of a problem.
Yeah. No, it's great point that you are making, and maybe let's generalize it a bit, and then we can get specifically to Microsoft Purview and the like, because I agree with you that they are leaving a lot to hope for. Let's call it that way from data security perspective. But if you're looking on data security, right, it's one of the segments in the cybersecurity space that was the least served in my view over the last 15, 20 years, where there are hundreds of data security companies, hundreds of products, and I would say generally almost none help organization to address some basic needs where they have the sensitive data, to be able to detect and prevent the right type of leakage or misuse of information, to be able to quantify it from a risk perspective. They just say the world is lacking this capability. Now, when we start to think about doing working on Bonfy, right, stands for Bonfy.AI, it was when Gen AI kind of started to take off. And we say, wow, there's a whole domain here, a data security domain that is completely unready for AI. And when we dug even more, we said, okay, it's unready for itself. I mean, data security solutions are just not a fit for the world predating Gen AI. There's the ability to classify and accurately analyze content, and the ability to have some single platform that it can be activated, let's call it that way, in a multi-channel way, in a consistent way, and it's at scale. They are not adaptive. They don't have context. They can actually analyze content with. They're just not a fit. And that's before Gen AI. And then we start to see kind of what's happening with the adoption of Gen AI, regardless of the adoption is I'm going to use Microsoft 365 Copilot, or I'm going to use ChatGPT, or I'm going to use some embedded Gen AI in some other custom application, or whatever it might be. The problems are the same and very similar to each other. Just solutions are not providing the visibility, accurate analysis, and therefore not any practical way to detect, prevent those type of risks. Data in motion, data at rest, data in use, super complex problem. And that's why we decided to start the company, right? Bonfy.AI. We launched a few months ago already. We have customers in production and making our kind of inroads into the market. The more we get into it, we see exactly what you saw, Joe, that organizations that you would expect to have some controls, maybe not great, maybe initial implementation, maybe not the most sophisticated processes, have very, very little going. And I think that the reality is that they are using tools and methodologies that are completely outdated. I mean, the concept, for example, to be able to discover everything, classify everything, ask humans to review the classifications on terabyte of data doesn't make any sense. No one ever will finish those projects. It could take 8 months or 5 years. And by the time you finish them, probably the classification is already wrong because the context around understanding each piece of content, a document, an email, whatever it might be, is completely off. So that's one issue. Second issue, with the adoption of Gen AI, more and more of the content is generated and used on the fly. Think about, let's say I'm writing an email assisted by Gemini or Copilot by Microsoft or anything else. No, I'm not saving the email, letting some machine classify that, maybe a human will review it, and later on I'll do something. It's created and shared instantaneously. Think about a web use of, let's say, ChatGPT or like sites, regardless if they are internal applications or commercially available applications, etc. So the world is shifting from data at rest, data in motion. The world, even for data at rest, is adopted, and the vendors associated with that adopted methodology that do not make sense for organizations. They look very theoretical, like, of course, let's discover everything, we'll get great visibility, and with the visibility, now we can control. Really? Show me one organization that actually, after they scanned 50 or 100 terabytes, understood what's there and took any meaningful action item. Now, let's say, think about you're a bank and you are now scanning your 50 or 100 terabyte. And God knows you're going to find a lot of banking information in your S3 buckets and Azure data stores, etc. What will you do then with that? Of course, you're a bank and you are going to have a lot of banking information. What happens then? Probably not a lot, right? So the world is changing, right? Much more generated content, shifting from data in motion to data, from data at rest to data in motion. need actual visibility and risk mitigation, not just discovery. And a lot of the solutions, both old and new, just don't fit the mark there. And that's why we started Bonfy. Make sense?
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense because, I've been in the industry for, I don't know, maybe 10 or 12 years at this point, right? I've spent a large amount of it in healthcare and financial industry. And I can't name a single time where, we knew, where the data was, we knew how it was classified, we knew, all the different tags with it, we knew the policies with it. We kind of bought these tools and, it was a multi-year project that just never seemed to end, right? And yeah, I've never seen an environment be that knowledgeable about their data. Most of the time, what they do is they throw it into a file share, they throw it into a database, they encrypt it, put least privilege on it, really enforce it hard, and that's like it. Because they don't know how else to kind of scale with their data. Because, like
Exactly.
you said, there's a manual process involved with these legacy technologies where you need someone that comes in and actually says, yeah, that's tagged right. That's classified right. Let's write this policy around it. And there's millions of pieces of data in just a few terabytes. Like it's not like an insane
Yeah,
size
it's
that we're even
manageable.
talking about,
Yeah,
Like,
I agree.
yeah, for modern computing, like it's a manageable size, but then you look at the actual data and it could be millions of pieces of data that you now have to classify somehow. And it's like, well, that person is going to do nothing else other than that.
Yeah, it will be wrong by the time it's done.
Yeah.
I would say it's almost inhumane to ask humans to classify. No, seriously, so much data. And all of that is without the use context, right? Part of the move from data at rest, data in motion is not just because of the generation, right? And use of GenAI, of course, right? Technologies in web traffic, Copilot type of use, and a lot of other type of ChatGPT and the like. That's part of the issue. But the second issue is that to classify a piece of content without understanding the context of the business and the context being used is almost meaningless. Again, take the example I mentioned earlier. Maybe let's shift the example to healthcare. Let's say you want to find where you have PHI. You'll run discovery. After 8 months, you'll see that you have everywhere PHI. Okay, because that's what you are doing as a healthcare provider. So what would you do then with the information? So the fact you have sensitive data, it's not the issue, right? Every business has sensitive data. Otherwise, probably they should not exist if they have no propriety or not custodian of customer data, or they don't have their own proprietary information. Why they are there even? So the question is not whether there is sensitive data. The question is sensitive data leaking to the wrong place. Can it leak by the wrong sharing? So think about, let's take an example now. Let's get to the Purview and Copilot in Microsoft Word. Let's say I'm using now Copilot, getting assistant to write some document, which is great. It uses the Microsoft Graph to be exposed to everything I have access to, whether I should have it or not. Copilot is writing something nice, looks good to me, saying, great, let's save. I'm going to share it with a customer. Fine. Not only that, if I may leak by that a lot of sensitive data, let's say I can share it because I was a bit reckless. I opened the share for the entire folder on the entire SharePoint site and not just for this file specifically. Okay, let's say, because I want to make sure that the customer has kind of the right access. I didn't consider the fact maybe some colleague of mine or myself put some other customer data in the same place, which was relevant only for the other customers. Who would know that? So the point is that the risk is not the fact there's sensitive data, the fact that it's being shared mistakenly, maliciously, non-maliciously, recklessly or not with the wrong parties. Regardless if the sharing is opening a share, right? Like data at rest, opening, let's say, permissions for someone to get to it, or sending it over email or over chat, or taking a piece and putting it in some unsanctioned chat GPT site or like, that's a problem.